got some pictures emailed to us from someone who had just built some raised bed mixes and they were concerned about their green beans. The picture on the left is the second planting on 5/8. The leaves are looking pretty green. The first planting on the right, planted on 4/24, there was some yellowing there. I think when we first saw this picture, we were thinking maybe it was related to cool temperatures, but I think the most severe cool temperatures were before the 24th. This picture was taken on the 20th of May. And then fortunately, this person sent us some further pictures just a couple days ago here. So these pictures were both taken on the 5th of June. And if you look at the picture on the left, the second planting, that was the one that appeared green in the previous pictures, has now all turned yellow. And if we take a look at the picture on the right, we can see a really great progression here of something that's going on. In the foreground, you see green beans that were planted on 4/24. And then in the rear there, you can see the beans that were planted on 5/8. So as you can see, most of them have lost their green color. If you look at the plants in the foreground, they appear severely stunted. The lower leaves have lost almost all of their color. Some of them are dropping. You will notice in the bottom there that the small leaves, the new growth, is slightly greener than the old growth, but not that rich green that we'd hope to see from plants. So I have had very similar questions to this in the St. Louis area. We have a lot of folks who use raised beds and raised bed mixes. And I often get a phone call and they say, well, I've always planted a garden in the ground. It's always done pretty well. I got a raised bed mix. Everything's growing really slowly. I'm not sure what's going on. So what we have here is a classic sign of nitrogen deficiency. So when those seeds are first planted, they're using nutrients, within the seed, but shortly after that, they begin experiencing a nitrogen deficiency. In terms of diagnosing nitrogen deficiency, nitrogen is mobile within the plant. So the N deficiency will appear in the older leaf first because the plant moves nitrogen from the older leaves to the newer growth. The older leaves will lose color and they may drop if the N is very low, and the younger leaves may still appear green, although they might not be a very rich green color. The plants will appear stunted. They'll have very low growth or very slow growth. If there is a deficiency, the plants will respond to a nitrogen application. We do have tissue analysis available to diagnose this for commercial growers if you want to get real technical about it. So, why does this happen? Why does this nitrogen deficiency occur? What are some of the issues that are going on here? So when we have uncomposted or not thoroughly composted high carbon materials that are incorporated into a soil or a growing medium, you have what's called nitrogen tie-up. So materials with a high C to N or carbon to nitrogen ratio higher than 25:1 can tie up nitrogen. So think about things like wood chips, sawdust, straw, bark, pine needles. So these wood chips and sawdust could be components of a raised bed mix that were not composted, or you could have compost that you added to the garden or compost that's part of a raised bed mix that is not thoroughly composted and has a higher C to N ratio than 25:1. So this occurs basically because in order for those high carbon materials to be broken down, microbes utilize free nitrogen in the soil to facilitate that breakdown process. And this leads to soil deficiencies of nitrogen. It's important to note that materials applied as surface mulch will not cause tie-up, but if you incorporate them in the garden, it may cause issues next year in terms of nitrogen deficiency. So if you have a nitrogen deficiency caused by this tie-up, for instance, you can start off by applying 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And, it might be helpful to apply it to say 90% of those green beans and then just leave 10% without the fertilizer. That will definitely confirm if this is the issue because we'll notice a response in the plants. But for synthetic sources, calcium nitrate, water-soluble nitrogen fertilizers, as well as some of the high nitrogen lawn fertilizers are sold as like a green up type. Those are primarily nitrogen. Just make sure you're not getting anything that has any kind of herbicides in it. If you're looking for organic options, blood meal, feather meal, cottonseed meal, and alfalfa meal are all high nitrogen organic sources. It's important to note that the organic fertilizers are always going to release nitrogen much more slowly because it requires microbes to break those materials down from the carbon structures. Blood meal is going to be the quickest release organic nitrogen source. If you make that first application and you're still seeing maybe not a great response, the plants aren't really greening up, you could follow up with another pound of nitrogen per 1,000 in 2 to 3 weeks after initial application. And just for reference, we do offer compost analysis through the soil and plant testing lab, and it will give you a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So, if you're going to buy a bunch of materials and incorporate them into your soil and you're interested to know the carbon nitrogen ratio, we can provide that through testing.